3 ships of the London Joint Stock Company left the Thames estuary on December 9, 1606 and headed for the New World America. Back in 1585, the famous pirate Walter Raleigh founded a colony there, naming it after Queen Elizabeth I, Virginia. But the settlers were unable to gain a foothold in their new location. The first colonists returned home, and the second batch of settlers disappeared without leaving a trace. The new expedition was led by Captain K. Newport, and the 3 ships that left London on a December morning were named Susan Constant, Discovery and Godspeed. In April 1607, they entered the Chesapeake Bay. A 7-member council was chosen from among the gentlemen who arrived to run the colony. It also included Captain John Smith. The future national hero of the United States was born in the English province of Lincolnshire, into the family of a middle-class farmer, George and Alice Smith. John combined helping his father with studying at a grammar school, where he studied reading, writing, arithmetic, and Latin. The ideal for little John was the famous navigator Francis Drake, and John decided to become a sailor. He did not like working on a farm. After the death of his father, 16-year-old John goes to France in the retinue of Lord Willoughby, and from there ends up in the Netherlands and fights for the independence of this kingdom. Returning home, Smith builds himself a hut made of tree branches in the forest belonging to Lord Willoughby, and lives there in seclusion, reading books on history, military affairs, and politics. The Lord visits John in his secluded dwelling and even teaches him horse riding and sword fighting. When John turned 18, he took a job on a commercial Mediterranean ship. Obviously, due to a lack of thrills, Smith enlists in the Austrian army and goes to war with the Ottoman Empire. The brave young Englishman is celebrated by the ruler of Transylvania, Batory. John Smith receives the military rank of captain. In 1602, Smith was wounded in battle and captured by the enemy. The captain is sold into slavery in Constantinople to the noble Turk Bojil, who gives him to his bride. Here the captain is passed from hand to hand, and as a result he finds himself on a large agricultural farm, on the territory next to modern Rostov. The irrepressible John cannot bear his servile position, humiliation, and beatings from the owner. He kills the owner and, having escaped, hides in the steppe on a horse, taking food and clothes. So he finds himself in the Cossack territory of the Don army. Getting to know the life and everyday life of the Cossacks does not remain useless for John. When organizing the fortification system of the new American colonies, he used the principles of defense of Cossack villages, and the first wooden buildings of the American colonists strongly resembled Russian huts. John Smith traveled through southern Russian lands and Lithuania to Germany, then traveled to France, Spain, and Morocco, and returned to Britain in the winter of 1645. Of course, John Smith, a lover of adventurous adventures, could not help but participate in the conquest of new lands in distant America, and on May 14, 1607, he set foot on American soil as part of 100 people. They founded a fort, which was named after King James I. Jamestown. After the ships sailed back to England, the colonists faced a life full of dangers. There was a constant shortage of food, so there were cases of cannibalism among the settlers. Many people died from diseases and the cold winter, and the fort was raided by local Indian tribes. Of the 104 people who remained in Jamestown, most had died by the time a new expedition arrived from England on October 8. With a large supply of provisions and colonists, John Smith remained among the fort's commanders and in early 1607 went inland with a small detachment in search of food. But the colonists were ambushed by the Algonquin Indians, and they were led to a chief named Powhatan. Smith immediately became interested in the Indian, who especially liked the pocket compass. But the indigenous population was extremely hostile to the aliens, and Smith and his companions were spared their lives, at the request of the 11-year-old daughter of a chief named Pocahontas. At least that's what John Smith himself wrote in his books. He was able to return to Jamestown and even establish trade relations between the Indians and the English settlement, but disagreements arose among the leaders of the fort, including D. Smith, and John left the settlement, deciding to explore the territory adjacent to the Chesapeake Bay. After the captain's departure, the situation in the colony only worsened, and the administration fell into complete disrepair. The residents sent a delegation to Smith asking him to return to Jamestown and take over the colony. He agreed, imposing strict discipline in the settlement. The main slogan of the settlers was, "Those who do not work do not eat." Smith was well aware that only through the joint efforts of all the colonists would the fort be able to survive and gain a foothold in the occupied territory. In October 1609, D. Smith returned to London, but this trip was forced. The captain was injured in a gunpowder accident, and he could only be cured at home. It just so happens that John Smith will never visit the colony in Virginia again. It was not until April 1614 that Captain Smith set sail for the New World again, and made a trip to Maine and the Massachusetts Bay Area. He will give this region a name that has survived to this day: New England. In 1615, John Smith fell into the hands of French pirates off the Azores, but escaped from them and eventually reached Britain. In the last years of his life, he did not travel anywhere, but wrote books about his travels. The General History of Virginia, New England, and the Somers Islands, in 6 parts, was published in 1624. In this work, he spoke for the first time about Pocahontas. In 1627, the Naval Grammar was published, and 3 years later the True Travels, Adventures, and Observations of Captain John Smith in Europe, Asia, Africa, and America from 1593 to 1629 AD. It is worth noting not only D. Smith's literary talent, but also his diligence, because his first book, The True Narrative of the Remarkable Events in Virginia, was published back in 1608. He wrote both the Description of New England, published in 1612, and the compilation of the first map of Virginia. Philip Barber, a biographer of D. Smith, wrote, "Captain John Smith's life was more exciting than it is represented in his legends. I must say that much of what John described was clearly an exaggeration, but he was one of those writers who conveyed their story without embellishment. Let's just say one thing. Everything that D. Smith wrote was true,